Mm, Okay, so welcome again. It is my honor to be here today with you on behalf of URI Europe. I'm Leila. I'm Cecilia as an officer in URI Europe, and I will be some kind of the technical support today. So, as I already mentioned, meeting will be recorded. We invite you to mute yourself unless you are speaking. You will have chance to ask some questions and to discuss after our speaker presentation. Also, please use chat function if you would like to ask something, if you would like to share information about yourself, and we are welcome and inviting you to share information about where are you coming from, or maybe some details about organization that you are working with, or some other things that you would like to share with other participants. Also, after the presentation, we would like to ask you two questions so that you can provide us some kind of feedback that we can see how this meeting was for you, and we would like to learn what you learned, what you are getting from the meeting, and also then what you intend to do with the knowledge or experience that you have after this meeting. So I will share this question in the chat, and I invite you just to spend a few minutes towards the end of the meeting sending this answer to those questions to us. So without further ado, I would like to give floor to Jaume, Vice President of URI Europe. He will shortly introduce himself, URI Europe, and then our speaker as well. And then I invite Jonas to continue with his presentation. And I hope that you will all enjoy. So Jaume, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Leila, and thank you everybody for being for attending this online lecture that we are holding today with our friends from Baraza and URI Europe. And URI, as you are already familiar with this organization, interfaith global grassroots organization, joining people around the world in cooperation circles for more than 20 years now. And I'm honored to be the current vice president of URI Europe for a couple of years now, 3, I don't remember well, but I do remember that Jonas was the treasurer of the organization at the time that I joined, and I was very much welcome. I felt totally accepted and embraced by the board and also Jonas, and I personally miss some chance to have deeper conversations, and but I do look forward to it. I'd like to introduce Jonas to all of you. He is a theologian and a peace activist from Belgium. He writes and lectures regularly on issues of religion, mysticism, and change in societies. And spiritually, he's rooted in the Christian tradition, but he has also become very well versed into the diverse Eastern religions. So this is a very broad scope that he is exploring his spiritual journey. He's made studies in philosophy, anthropology, and theology at different universities, and then became active in different kinds of local and international peace work. Focusing on cultural and religious diversity. And so feel free to also visit his website, where you may find further information about his work. And it is Jonas Atlas, as is his name, .net. So I'm giving the floor to Jonas to start your lecture. Thank you so much for being here, and go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaume. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to see so many people and faces I haven't seen in a long time. But because our time is short, I'll just quickly dive into it, open my presentation, and then we'll go for a good delve into the topic that lies before us. Because I think it's a very timely topic. It's something that there's an urgent need to talk about it, but people don't often think about the need to talk about it because like my title says, interreligious dialogue and the problem of defining religion. Mostly people think, okay, semantic place, why would anybody care in this world how we exactly define religion? But let's hope that my presentation makes it more clear why the problem of the definition of religion really is something to think about and something to take into consideration. Certainly, when we talk about interreligious dialogue, or when we try to envision what interreligious dialogue these days might be. And in a group like this, that's of course what many people are involved in. So without further ado, here we go into the whole concept. As any student of religious study knows, this will be my starting point. There is no universally accepted definition of religion. I mean, in every academic lecture about religion, in any introductory course, you'll hear that there's many definitions being put forward, but the academics really haven't agreed. Now, that mostly doesn't mean much to people. They don't really care what the exact definition of religion might be or might not be, because for most people, religion simply is the stuff that has to do with faith and belief, the things that people believe. The Christians have this set of convictions, Muslims have this set of convictions, and Hindus have that set of convictions, and that is what clearly separates them from each other and what makes them different as religious people. That's a bit the idea. But this idea is very widespread, and is like the norm when we talk about religion, but can be questioned, because is it truly the case that religion, in essence, as a concept, religion itself, really starts from the concept of what you believe in, and also the prescribed rules or rituals that you would do? And is that also the case, you could ask and wonder, within every religion as such? To answer my question pretty straightforwardly, let's just have a look at Hinduism to start with. The religion of Hinduism, I take this image because not just it's about many gods, but I use this image to show the diversity, the inner diversity of Hinduism itself, because open any introductory text or read any introductory text about Hinduism, and this is the type of stuff that you'll read. Now, it comes from Wikipedia, but it could come from anywhere. Hindus can choose to be polytheistic, pantheistic, panentheistic, pandeistic, henotheistic, monotheistic, monistic, agnostic, atheistic, or humanist. Ideas about all the major issues of faith and lifestyle are subjects of debate and not of dogma. So they're not that straightforward as people might think. Now, for people who would say, well, that's Wikipedia, that's not really a good source, let's take Wendy Doniger, one of the most renowned Hindologists in the world. Defining Hinduism is not, she says, a simple matter of listing things that all Hindus believe or even that all Hindus do. There are no such things. Although there are a number of things that have been characteristic of many Hindus over the ages, like for example the worship of many gods, belief in karma and rebirth, or the belief in caste system, none have to be true of all Hindus. So, and that's an obvious case in Hinduism, but that of course means that this third largest religion in the world, to which about 1 billion people in the world belong, does not start from clear-cut beliefs or clear-cut faiths. We cannot really say these are the contents of the faith of Hinduism. It's so diverse that you can't even say that Hinduism can be defined by a certain set of propositions or convictions or even rituals or things that you would do. So if that doesn't apply to the religion of 1 billion people in the world, why then do we think that this is the defining concept of religion as such? I could go on with examples like this because it's not just Hinduism. One of my favorite examples comes from Buddhism. Buddhism is often referred to as something that people even debate whether it's a religion or not. Now, I'm not going to go into that debate, but one of the interesting things about Buddhism is that generally speaking, let's say the most dominant forms of Buddhism don't really start from a concept of a god, or certainly not a creator god. It's not really at the forefront of Buddhism. So people say sometimes that Buddhism is an atheist. Well, if they talk about the atheism of Buddhism, they'd rather not call it a religion. So that's where the discussion comes from. Is it not? There's no gods in certain types of Buddhism, but other types of Buddhism, let's say Tibetan Buddhism, for anybody who knows a bit about it, it's full of demons and angel-like beings and gods and goddesses and all you want. Or let's take this temple or pagoda in Thailand. In this specific temple complex, it's different temples together in one bigger hall. Yes, you can find little pagodas where there's Buddha statues like this, pretty typical, but in the same place you can just as well find this immensely huge statue of the god Ganesh, who's actually a Hindu god and who's just as much worshipped in this Thai Buddhist setting as he would be in India itself. So, even within religions themselves, sets of specific beliefs are far from all determining. Not even the concept of God, not even the concept of a belief in a transcendent being is something that defines a specific religion, let alone that there would be a specific type of belief which connects all religions in the world. So we can't really say religion as a concept is that stuff that has to do with convictions like belief in God. It's way too varied, it's way too different in its different manifestations to say a thing like this. It kind of undermines our most basic intuition about what religion is. Later on I'll try to explain what the implications of this undermining of our concept really could be. But for now, let me go a bit further into clarifying how structural the problem is, because the exact same thing cannot just only be said about things that you believe in. It's the same thing about behavior rules or ethics. Within religions, they vary so much, they vary in such an amount that you can't even define the religion itself around those behavioral rules, let alone that there would be specific rules that make religions into religion as such. To give you just one example, one of my favorites, this is a painting. Maybe some people know it. It comes from my birth town in Ghent. It's a medieval painting, one of the most exquisite examples of Christian art in those days, or Western European Christian art in those days. Now, I use this image to just conjure up the medieval style of dealing with religion and Christianity. And when people think about the Middle Ages and Christians, they think about Christians who devoutly go to church at least every Sunday, if not even every day, and so on and so on. Now, one of the problems with that image is that it's completely untrue. Most people in the Middle Ages really didn't go to church at all. From this book, which is actually about witchcraft and spirit belief in the Middle Ages, you can find, for example, this paragraph. In 1635, one pamphleteer lamented that it really was a case of 2 or 3 persons gathered in God's name. Of those who attended church, many just went through the motions with little real understanding. A large proportion of the laity could not recite the Lord's Prayer or 10 Commandments and knew little of Christian scripture or doctrine. One observer complaining in 1606 that people knew more about Robin Hood than they did about the stories in the Bible. So we tend to think that Christian churches in Western Europe are empty today. Well, it was just as much the case in the Middle Ages. What were people in the Middle Ages dealing with? Predominantly the whole fabric of a belief system was more inclined to think about, let's say, the fairy mother and goblins and elves and that kind of stuff. That is not to say that there were actually animist and they weren't really Christian. No, because in the same book that I have just shown you the cover of, in that same book you can read how those people were completely convinced to be good Christians, and they would say so as well. Some of them really didn't want to become a Protestant and would remain a Catholic, but predominantly their life would be about these kinds of creatures, completely fused within their own vision of Christianity of that day, and they certainly wouldn't be doing the things that we would take for granted as typical Catholic rituals, like going to Mass and so on. But who am I to say that medieval Christians wouldn't be real Christians or something? So this is just as much a part of Christianity as anything else, which just makes it even more difficult to define the content of Christianity, or the faith as such of Christianity, or the rituals of Christianity, the way too diverse in history and in geography to be essentialized into a certain set of convictions. What those last examples, like the Buddhist temple and this idea of animist beliefs fused into medieval Christianity, what they also show is that religions also aren't neatly compartmentalized as most people think. Kind of follows from the idea that religions, if they would be defined by lists of convictions or lists of things that you do, then that would mean there's a clear difference. Muslims believe this and this and this and do that and that and that, while Christians, on the other hand, believe this and this and do that and that. If that is not the case, then you can kind of expect that there's this overlap sometimes if there's this huge variety. And I've shown you a couple of examples, but again, to just show you how structural it is, you can find it all over the place. For example, this is one of my favorite examples. This is seemingly just another Buddha picture from China, but that's not really the case. If you zoom into the picture, then you'll see he's carrying a little cross on his hand, because this is not a Buddha, this is the Yishu Fo. Well, it's a Buddha, but it's the Jesus Buddha. That's Yishu Fo, Jesus Buddha. Where does this Jesus Buddha come from? Well, the whole history is that in the, let's say, between 300 and 500, Manichaeism spread far and wide. Now, Manichaeism isn't very well known today, but it was a religious movement, let's say, in those days. So it was a kind of a competition for what eventually would turn into the dominant churches of Christianity today, the Orthodox and the Catholic Church. In those days, Manichaeism was just as large, so between 300 and 500, but it was a Christian sect. A Christian sect that was based on the preachings of Mani, who claimed to be a Christian and who claimed to be in the line of Christ, but who also added his own ideas. Now, there was a bit of a conflict between the groups that would turn into the normal churches, or the churches that we know today, and Manichaeism. And Manichaeism kind of spread out through other places. It was far and widespread from Brittany all over the Mediterranean, but it also went all the way through what we could call Iran today, or all the way up to China. And so in China, you find those Christian images of not just Jesus Buddhas, but also, for example, of this Mani Buddha, Mani Guangfu, Mani, the Buddha of light, which isn't really Buddhism, but it's a kind of fusion of Buddhism, Manichaeism, Christianity, all rolled into one. Just another example, just a simple home altar of somebody today, not to get stuck into a historic example, but just today you find things like this just as well. In Calcutta, many people like this woman. You can find a documentary about this on the YouTube, like this woman. People who just place an image of Mother Teresa on their home altar. It's not just Mother Teresa, it's also Mother Mary right beside a Krishna in this case, and the Guru Nanak, which is pretty typical religious devout behavior of certain Hindus in India. For example, here you've got a Jesus statue in the middle of a Hindu temple. So, if religions aren't some sort of neatly demarcated packages of beliefs and customs, which we mostly think they are, if they aren't that particular thing, then how can we define them? And so that brings me to the problem of the definition of religion. In essence, if you go through the academic problem of the definition of religion, I mean, with the academic problem, I mean it's a discussion that's been going on for a long time. So a lot has been said about it, and by now there's a kind of agreement. There's two main big types of definitions of religion as such, and those two types of definitions, they fall into two categories. You've got the substantive definitions and you've got the functional definitions. Now, the substantive definitions are the definitions that will define religion in sets of things that specifically belong to religion, like faith in transcendent beings, like rituals, like mythology. So if you've got rituals and mythology and a belief in something transcendent, then you're a religion, for example. Functional definitions will define religion more in what religion means into the world. For example, religions bind people together in a common understanding of the world. So the fact that they are the binding glue between a community, that's what makes it a religion. Now, you could go into several types of definition of religion in that way, but there's some problems with both of them. The problem with substantive definitions is that whatever list that you make, it really isn't something that is limited to religion. Let's say the belief in a transcendent something. If that is what defines a religion, then everything which is a belief in something transcendent becomes a religion. For example, let's take human rights. It's a transcendent concept. Many people believe in it. Does that mean that normal democracy today, which takes human rights as a starting point, is a religion or not? On the other hand, the things that you think that are clearly something of religions oftentimes aren't. For example, the example I already gave, Buddhism as a religion is not necessarily focused on a god. There's atheist forms of Hinduism. There's even atheist forms of Judaism. So even the belief in God as such is not even something that brings together all religions as such, and so it doesn't define religion either. So whatever list you could make, it's the same for mythology and so on. You could go on and on with things that you relate to religion and in which you try to define the religion. Either some things on those lists won't be present in all religions, or the things that you present will be present in a lot of other things. To make it a bit more concrete, here you've got an example of Steve Bruce. It's an academic who wrote the book Secularization. It's a defense against the common trend today to say that, well, there was this secularizing process in the world for 100 or 200 years, but today religion is more prominent than ever. It's gaining traction again. Religion is becoming more important again. And Steve Bruce wants to argue the opposite. He's got a whole bunch of data to show that actually, no, it's not true. The world at large is actually secularizing. And we need to take the data into account, and then you'll see that, yes, it's secularizing. Okay, that's a discussion that you might have. But one of the interesting things is that when Steve Bruce defines what he means or understands about to religion to be, then you get this. In really the first page of his introduction in his book, you can read this particular example of a definition of religion, of a substantive definition. Hence, I will define religion substantively as beliefs, actions, and institutions based on the existence of supernatural entities with powers of agency, that is gods, or impersonal processes possessed of moral purpose, the Hindu and Buddhist notion of karma, for example, that set the conditions of or intervene in human affairs. although rather long-winded, that covers most of what we mean when we talk about religion and so offers a reasonable starting place. The first thing, yes, it's a long-winded definition that probably covers most of what we mean when we talk about religion, but it's not a reasonable starting place because it actually covers a whole lot more than that as well. Let's say if religion is defined by impersonal processes possessed of moral purpose, let's say the invisible hand of the market is within liberal thinking about the world, within liberal economy, is an impersonal process possessed of moral purpose, which defines how the world will work and which economists and a lot of politicians think that they should take into account when they want to regulate the world. Does that mean that liberalism is a religion? And if liberalism is a religion, let's say the historic dialectic of which Marxists and socialists speak, that's an impersonal process and so on. So socialism becomes a religion, liberalism becomes a religion. Now, okay, that means that about anything that has to do with a conviction is actually religious when you follow Steve Bruce, which completely undermines his whole argument, because then how would you see any secularization in the world if everything is so religious that even supposedly secular politics are actually religious? Good, then you could say, okay, substantive definitions don't work, you can't make lists. We're not going to go for a list. We'll make functional definitions. That's not really going to help you with the exact problem, because in fact, the people who use functional definitions mostly readily admit that, okay, we're just gonna term the thing which has this function, that's what we're gonna call religion. So if it binds the group together, for example, let's say the function of religion is to bind a group, then same thing, any political ideology which binds a group, let's say nationalism, for example, yeah, well, actually that also becomes religion. So many academics who propose functional definitions of religion will actually say, yeah, nationalism is also a religion because it also offers group cohesion like other religions. On top of it, when you still want substantive definitions, nationalism is a perfect example of something which is based on strong beliefs in something quite transcendent, namely a people, a country. A country is not something which is engraved into the earth. It's a concept that you believe in. It's got a long mythology, mostly about the country and the people, whatever it may be. It's got recurrent rituals, it's got ethical norms, and so on. So within most definitions of religion, nationalism would fall into the category. Okay, now I come to all the implications. What I've done so far is clarify that what we think religion is really doesn't always reply to religion, and on the other hand, the definitional problem makes it difficult to know what we're actually talking about, because we could be talking about everything. If every political ideology is also religious, what does that all mean? What do we have to do? It does really have implications for interreligious dialogue, because A, religion isn't the problem. And in brackets I say both the priest and the politician have strong beliefs. So why do I say this? First of all, lots of interreligious dialogue is often done with the well-intention of making the world better. Because religions often conflict, that's why we're going to build this bridge, interreligious dialogue. We're going to try to take away the conflict by having an interreligious dialogue. Now, the question is, why would religion be the problem? Supposedly because religions have strong convictions and people who are religions want to put their convictions on the others. That's what makes it dangerous. But again, in what way would religion be different than any political ideology with strong convictions that tries to put its convictions on the rest of the world? There is no difference there. That's why I say the priest and the politician both have strong beliefs. It's about strong beliefs that, okay, you have to manage within a society, and there's different ways and forms to manage the public arena and the difference of opinion and so on and so on. But religion isn't the only and specific thing that creates conflict of opinions or something like that. So that's first. There is no way to really clearly separate what we call religions from other ideologies. So religion really isn't a problem here. So why, in fact, would the starting point of interreligious dialogue have to be this bridging of religions to take away conflict? It's not that kind of dialogue that's going to take away the conflict, I believe. 2, religions don't need the dialogue, people need the dialogue. Follows from the first part a bit. It's not religions as such which can dialogue to start with. Religions are internally way too diverse. You can't have religion as a whole talking to another religion. That's impossible. You've got varied people with a religious background talking to each other. But what one says is probably not what the other is going to say. And I'm not even talking about, let's say, difference between Sunni or Shia or Orthodox or Protestant or something. That's not even the difference I'm talking about. I'm talking about the difference between some will be progressive and others will be conservative. So if you've got that variation of people within every religion, your religious dialogue really isn't a dialogue between religions as such, simply because you can't put those lists that you can square off. What you're doing is talking from one person to another, and yes, you're informed by tradition behind you, which you bring to the table, but that tradition isn't a whole that you could clearly define. So the dialogue is between people, not between religions as such. And the third one goes way beyond interreligious dialogue, actually, but probably interreligious dialogue should be at the forefront of it. We urgently need to rethink what religion actually is, because the way we look at religion seems more important at the moment than the way religions supposedly look at the world. Kind of comes back to the first point, that we act as if religion as such is the problem, while actually the way we present religion makes us focus perhaps on something which blinds us from issues which are more at hand. So, a small proposal from my side for an alternative view on religion. I'm not just gonna let you hang there. And my proposal is this: to think about the fact that religions aren't brands. Certainly in these neoliberal times where consumption is everything all over the world, we tend to view the world from our economic perspective. And that's clear when we talk about religions. When we talk about religions, we act as if they're brands with their particular products. Let's say, within Christianity, you've got priests, but here you can buy Judaism as well. There they've got rabbis. Within Christianity, you've got a heaven, but in Buddhism, you've got reincarnation. Take what you want. Come here to the cashier and give the right amount of credits, and you'll receive the product of this or that religion. So that's the way we talk about religion, is as if they have something on sale for everybody, which you can then choose to buy or not buy. And those religions will be in conflict because all of them want the monopoly over the world. So what you certainly won't find is that there's a mixture of religions. Because everybody kind of has his own formula, which he doesn't give the secret recipe into the world. That, of course, makes no sense. Because of all the examples I have been giving in the last half hour, everybody can see that it makes no sense at all to talk about religion in that way, yet we do most of the time. So let's discard the idea of religions as brands with products, and let's go for religions actually are more like languages. Because when we talk about languages, which is a far more neutral concept than religion, at least these days, It's interesting to think about the many similarities between the two. First of all, yes, you can kind of say there's a language there, but we all know that languages mix. Half of the time, languages take over words or concepts from other languages. If you take that over a couple of hundreds of years, sometimes you completely lost the memory of the fact that a certain word or a certain way of saying things actually was imported from another language. Languages evolve, like for example my own language, Flemish Dutch. I can't speak the Dutch of the Middle Ages. In the same way, certain ways of practicing a religion, let's say the Middle Ages Christianity, wouldn't be the Christianity I recognize today. So same thing there. The same thing as well with dialects. Every language, as we know, has its dialects, its different ways of being spoken, and how those dialects evolve and mix through time. Well, that's just the way of history, let's say. And I guess we could say just as well the same thing of religions. Perhaps it's better not to speak of different sects, but to speak of different dialects. And then the last thing, just like a language allows you to write both poems and pamphlets, I use this to imply you can write mystic poetry about feelings and so on, and just as well you can write political tracts and laws and juridical texts and so on. You've got a wide variety of things you can do with a language. So what happens with religion is basically the same thing. Yes, your religion could go into mystical heights, and just as well any religion can turn out to be very political and charged and very at the forefront of public life. To conclude then, let's study religion as interesting languages to talk about pressing issues, and let's stop treating religions as pressing issues themselves. What I mean is, if someone calls for violence in English, you wouldn't say his problem is that he speaks English. That makes no sense at all. But that is what is often done when we're talking about religion. Oh, there's some violence there. It's perpetrated by this or this religious group. It's their religion which is the problem. Not at all. The problem is violence. And every religious tradition has lots to say about violence. Sometimes positive things, sometimes negative things. But any religion as a spiritual, existential type of language, psychological type of language as well. As a type of language, it's capable of expressing many ideas on the mystical, spiritual, and psychological level in certain ways. And those ways can be beneficial to the world and they can be detrimental. That's a whole other point. But it's not the language itself which is the problem. But within the tradition, there's lots of things that you can learn to talk about a certain problem. Just like it's interesting to learn languages, to find more ways of saying the things that you have been saying all your life, or sometimes wanted to say but couldn't say, and then you learn another language and then you all of a sudden find this concept of which you think, now that's what I wanted to say all my life. And so, screen sharing has stopped as the shared window is closed. I had one final, do I still have the time also?
Yes, you can present some of the last slides.
The last slide. Okay, I see. I had done away with it, so I'll just put it open again and hop, and then I'll share that one again. Where does that go? Here we go. So, if we think of religion as a language, that will allow us to rethink. Oh, there's some. Yeah, that will allow us to rethink what religion actually is and see them for the psychological, existential, and spiritual languages they really are. And so their words aren't words, their words are images, their words are stories. Their grammar isn't really grammar. Their grammar is myth, is tradition, is ritual, and so on. And so in that sense, it's a language of the psychological, existential, and spiritual realms of our being a human. So, and if we look at religion that way, then we can actually start speaking from a dialogue between people who speak a certain language and drop the idea that is their languages that need a dialogue. We just need to try not to get lost in translation. And then we can also fully realize why religion isn't a problem, because, like I said, if somebody calls for violence in English, you would say English is his problem. Okay, and that would be my presentation. So I hope I made a bit clearer why the definition, although it might sound like a boring academic idea to talk about the definition of religion, why it's actually quite urgent to rethink our view on religion, because there's quite some bits and pieces not in place.
Thank you very much, Jonas. I'm sure that all of us can agree that this was a great presentation, and at least in case of myself, I think that now there is a room to rethink a lot of concepts that we were strongly believing in, at least before your presentation. So I think that it was quite useful and that it helped us think about some new ideas and concepts that you really nicely present. We have around 10 minutes to at least start opening floor for some question and answers. So please, whoever would like to ask something, you can either post your question in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and you can make the comment or ask any questions to our dear presenter Jonas. So use opportunity to discuss about some of those very interesting questions that Jonas discussed about.
Yes, Jonas, I really much appreciate your presentation. It's so refreshing. And so if we think of religions as languages, which they are, then interreligious dialogue would be like an act of translating or interpreting, because languages, I also interpret a lot, and I see how important it is to have an interpreter who kind of understands both cultures or both religions or both whatever you call it, to come to a communication. So I guess religion as a language that needs to be translated in order to create communication and understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I agree. And also it means that we should watch out for certain problems that brings with it, because, for example, it's also very difficult to really master a language. Yes, you can get a hold of it and pretty well, and probably if you talk or if you study the language for many years, you could become very fluent even. But even if you're extremely fluent, then still people will hear your dialect, or they will hear the fact that you're not a native speaker, and those kinds of things actually are pretty true for religion as well. Certainly when we talk about ideas like conversion and so on, what you'll often notice is that people who convert bring in their mother tongue into their newly found religious tradition, and really sometimes think that they're speaking the language of the other while they have retained a whole bunch of their mother tongue in their new language, in the grammar of their new language, which doesn't have to be a problem. That's how it evolves, all of it. But it's just interesting to keep it in mind. Yeah. Mariana.
Even when you speak your mother tongue, you know that there are a lot of a variety of misunderstandings. So religion is a very, very personal and very individual thing. And I'm very happy about your performance, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And the thought that just came to me is that sometimes the language, the language defines what we can say. So it's maybe a little bit similar that a religion also shapes us in a way. And it's both, it works both ways. So there is an interaction between the language and what we can say and what we say and the language, and also it interacts. So they depend on each other.
Absolutely, and that actually brings us back really to the start of my whole exposition, because in a sense the way we look at religion now is Christian true and true. We tend to see it in a supposedly scientific way. The way we deal with religion is just a sociological way of approaching the world, but actually religion as a word, as a concept, has a very Christian history, and that Christian history is still present in the dominant world view, which is dominated by eventually last 3 centuries by European and American geopolitical context, let's say. And that context was grown within a certain language, and that language was transposed onto the rest of the world. And what you see is that the word religion has always been placed upon other traditions where it didn't really fit really well. And that's why you get all those problems with the definition of religion, because you use a term which makes sense within a certain language, and then you kind of force it into other languages where the term didn't really exist. So actually all cultures didn't have a word for the concept religion, things that might seem like it but really weren't that particular thing. And that's what brings all those definitional problems, because we're looking at the world from the view of one particular language.
If I may say something again, but the languages can, of course, be problematic. If you have words like chosenness or revelation that some have and some don't, and so on. So don't you see the conflict potential or the problem with the language itself?
See, no, because that's exactly like language. Language itself has the word chosen. Does that mean that language is a problem because it allows you to use the word chosen? Is language a problem because you can swear in languages? There's really, every language has the most awful curse words. That doesn't make the language a problem. It makes it unrespectful when you use a curse word. And that for me would be the same thing with religion. You can live religion in a respectful way, and you can use it to downgrade people, yeah, of course, just like any other language. But that doesn't make the language itself inherently problematic. Even a word like chosen can go all sorts of ways. In a sense, we're all chosen. Well, in my view, in my particular religious, spiritual view, we're all in a certain sense chosen because we're all suffused with the divine, but that would be a completely different interpretation of the word chosen and of the concept within a religious tradition.
This is where you arrive through interreligious dialogue, that you see the meaning of the words, their potential for danger and their potential for positive transformation. Exactly.
Yeah, I would like to add, well, I feel that this is a metaphor, a very, very fascinating metaphor that you are proposing to reframe religion within the terms of language rather than the usual terms of belief or a set of beliefs or dogmas or etc. And I was thinking that the analogy can be furthered. For example, if you think of languages like my own, for example, that have the Academy of Language, the group of the board of people who are connoisseurs and who are experts in the language and who set rules and establish grammatical correctness for what can be said and what cannot. And other languages such as English, for example, and I don't know about Flemish or Dutch, that are more based on common usage, or what people say, what people are actually expressing. And yes, you have dictionaries and all that, but this is just guidelines, and people are free to innovate and to create new words and to say that I'm going to email you something without waiting for the academy to say, yes, you can email things, the verb exists, or the verb that does not exist. So this also defines different kinds of religious approach, or kind of organizations also, or of ways of religions to organize themselves. So how do you think about that?
No. Yeah, I think that analogy can be made perfectly well as well. Yeah, I think it completely fits. There's lots more analogies that you can make. Like, for example, the concept of a lingua franca, like Arabic was for a long time, like English is today a lingua franca all over the world. Most people speak 2 languages, basically. All over the world, English becomes a second language. And in that sense, you could say that the dominant form of religion, which we don't call religion, but within my view, of course, would be, in that sense, I follow the functionalists who say if it looks like a duck and it acts like a duck, it probably is a duck. So if it looks like religion and it acts like religion, it probably is religion. And that would mean that the mindset that we currently call, let's say, secular humanism or something, or modernity, or whatever you want to call it, that in itself, for me, is a religious tradition. Had it originated in India or in Africa or in another part of the world, we'd call it a religion. But it's because it's Western, and how often Western people aren't capable of realizing just how religious they are, or don't want to be religious, because they feel this need to be further on in the evolution of the world or something. So we left religion behind, but actually, if religion is a language, then we really didn't. We have created this other language, and within that language, there's this conceptualization of a difference between secular and religion, and it makes it all muddy and difficult to talk about. But if we're really honest, the lingua franca in a religious sense, the religious lingua franca does really exist. We actually know pretty well what it is. It's also just as varied as any other religion. You've got the most conservative views and the most progressive views within that lingua franca. That's not it. But most people also know it all over the world, and most people speak it somewhat right beside their other more native tongues. So that analogy could be made just as well, and that could allow us to have a more honest look at this dominant religion, which isn't called religion, the name that must not be named, or something like that. That's interesting to put the lens back and to see just how religious are we in that sense. And for a lot of people in Western Europe and so on, that if I go on with the analogy, that would mean that most Christians, certainly in the US as well, actually aren't Christian in the traditional sense or something, but speak this dominant religion, and then often delve into an older language which used to be there. It's a bit like speaking Italian today, and on the other hand, also once in a while reading in Latin or something like that. That's often what we get in Western Europe among Christians. They actually, in reality, speak this dominant religion, or they speak in these dominant categories of today, and they often delve into another religious language which seems more traditional, and that's an interesting. I'm not saying this counts for. I mean, we're talking to a global audience here, so it's very different in different parts of the world. But when it comes to Western Europe and Christianity specifically, I think it often holds the analogy. Often. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for all your question and answer. We also have one question coming into the chat from our colleague from Denmark, so maybe I can read it and then you can, Jonas, refer to it. So our colleague Soren from Denmark asked, if religions are like languages, doesn't that mean that religion is just a generic category without meaningful content and hence does not allow for truth claims? But if we don't allow for truth claims, how can you, for example, say that violence is the problem? And that is a normative statement about metaphysic reality founded in a belief in the dignity of the human being. And simply put that, how do you avoid ending in relativism?
Yeah, no, it's not relativism. Just like you can still study religions as languages, just like you can study languages. Languages themselves are pretty amorphous, but still you kind of know what you're talking about because it's this matrix of words and grammar and so on, and it all binds together somehow, but it's not, you can't essentialize them. That's the only thing. Let's say Christianity as a language, yeah, of course, the figure of Christ and let's say the idea of Trinity is pretty in the center of the web, but it's not. It doesn't define Christianity. Let's say again, Christian Western Europe or even Belgium. Let's take my own context here in Belgium. If you ask the average Christian today, even the people who still go to church, if you ask them, what's your view on Trinity? Most will go like, oh my God, what are you talking about? And even if they have an answer, you get such an amount of different answers that you really can't say that Christians in Belgium believe in Trinity. Well, it's a bit more complex than that. That doesn't take away the fact that within the tradition, Trinity, of course, is a concept which is in the center of the matrix or the web of that religious language. Just like you could say that the way that object-verb is at the center of, let's say, English, Dutch, or a lot of languages, of course. So just like you can study one without becoming relativistic, you can study the other without becoming relativistic. But what I try to take away is this, ooh, it's religion. It's something to be scared about. It's something, not at all. But just like languages can incite, it's also not relativism. It's not saying that religious can be used, or not used, I don't like the term used, but because it's a language, let me put it that way, because it's a language, exactly because of it, it is capable of firing up certain emotions, just like a well-written and presented speech can get the people going. That's what languages can do. If you look at both the most awful cases of rhetorics, let's say, obvious case, Hitler, for example, or you take the most exquisite example of rhetorics, let's say Martin Luther King, those have invigorated lots of people in their words. And the same thing goes for their religious language. It has also invigorated in a bad way in one case and in a very good way in another case. So yeah, that's not relativism. You have to deal with it. But all of a sudden, the dynamics you're researching becomes, how does violence work within the psychology and the existential and spiritual dynamics of people? It stops being, religion stops being an explanatory thing. It's not like, oh, there's violence there, the origin is religion. That's never a good answer. That's a bit my point. You can't explain anything by pointing at religion. When you point at religion, you point at such a wide variety of things, which is involved in dynamics, but it's the dynamics which are interesting. It's interesting to know how violence works. But the question we mostly ask is, why is a certain religion violent? And that's not the question. The question is, where does violence come from? And in what historic way, in this particular context, is this religious language part of a certain larger dynamic? I hope I made myself clear and stayed away from the claim of relativism.
Yeah, I hope that the Søren, who asked the question, is satisfied. If not, he can, of course, make more comment in chat. I just want to invite you again to answer those 2 questions that we posted in the chat a few times. So we will appreciate your feedback. And because we are coming till the end of the time, being together, maybe there are some more questions and comments. So I would like just to close this webinar officially so that people who would like to leave, they can leave. And those who would like to stay, if Jonas have some more time, then maybe they can stay and continue discussing or asking some questions. So because this webinar series is organized as a part of celebration of World Interfaith Harmony Week, and it is organized together between Baraza, which is URI Europe CC, an organization from the Germany, with URI Europe. I would like to ask our dear colleague Georg from Baraza to shortly introduce Baraza and also invite people to join the rest of the webinar series. And with that, we will conclude it, and thank you all. So after that, you are all free to leave, and those of you who would like to continue discussing with Jonas, you are of course more than welcome to stay for 10-15 more minutes, and then we can conclude it. So Georg, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to thank you, Jonas, for this really great presentation. I think the vivid discussion following the presentation really shows that it was very inspiring to us, especially the idea of looking into religion as a certain sort of language. It really did broaden the horizon to us. And also for me, it was a very positive new thought. Thank you very much for this. Let me introduce myself. I'm George Popp from Munich. I'm the president of Baraza, which is an independent international non-profit organization founded in 2017 in Munich, Germany. Baraza means council or meeting place in Swahili language. Baraza can be an informal meeting or an official council. It is a place where people from many different backgrounds meet to chat, exchange ideas, but more important even, to come together to solve problems. We as Baraza, we are expanding all the time. We were responsible for the concept and planning and delivering of an international exhibition named Tolerance, Understanding, Coexistence, which is the Sultanate of Oman's message of Islam. And this global initiative has been touring now around the world for more than 10 years. We have been present in more than 40 countries, and within all this time, we have built up a good relation to many individuals and professionals and organizations to promote international mindsets based on tolerance in all areas of culture, religion, and the understanding among nations. And I'm very happy that many advisors from our board now are joining us here in this webinar series. Thank you very much for these people. And also thank you very much to URI giving us the chance to get this interaction in the webinars. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram on our website, www.baraza.ngo. And maybe of interest for you will be that you can download their free interface resource for children. It's our coloring book for kids on world religions, which is available there in many different languages. Some of these booklets were produced in cooperation with URI Europe. So thank you very much again for joining us on this webinar. And whoever has time to discuss some time further on now is mostly welcome. Otherwise, I will say goodbye now and hope to see you for the next webinar. Thank you very much.
So thank you again, everyone, for coming. So as Georg also mentioned, if there are some more questions or comments, you are more than welcome to ask. If not, we would like to thank you all for participating, and big thank you again, Jonas, for the great presentation and for so many intriguing ideas that we can start rethinking some of the things that we were strongly believing maybe before this webinar. So are there any more questions, comments? If not, then we can conclude. And as Georg said, you are more than welcome to join us some of the next webinars that are happening next week. So are there any more questions, comments? Nothing. Okay, then have a lovely evening or rest of the day. Thank you again, Jonas, for joining us and for providing us these great presentations, and hope to see you soon again. So bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye.
Thank you very much for the webinar. I was very glad to see all of you. Karim, especially you.
Thank you for joining us.
For me, it was very good. Karim,
Lovely.
I can't find words. I'm so glad to see you, to watch you, to hear you. But you understand, I am with my English, it's very difficult immediately to speak out.
Очень
But the
приятно
questions...
было увидим вас, этот разговор.
Спасибо большое. Thank you very much. I would look for the information about the webinars and the meetings, and it will be very good, especially personally for me, for my language. With the years, I began to lose my abilities of speech, of oral speech, in English speech.
So nice to see you again, and Shamgia is coming from the Ural Mountains, from a Tatar village. So we have really so good having you with us.
Very good. Now,
and you're a teacher, right?
Thank you very much. Thank you. I was very pleased. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Jonas, I will be looking forward to visit you again. I made a long piece of paper what I like to talk to you about these things.
Okay, then
But
you have to come over here.
There is no time now.
Okay, we'll find another time. No problem. Next time I'm in Bonn or something.
Or we on your little mountain.
Yeah, that would also be lovely.
That wonderful place there.
Yeah, indeed. You're all welcome.
All the best.
Same.
I just
will you please? What about the text of the presentation you have shown?
There is no text.
There is no text.
All in the brain.
But here they were writing some words, some sentences.
The presentation itself. I don't usually give away presentations because I use a lot of images and they need the context of what I'm saying. If they're without the context, then they go and live their own lives, and I prefer not to, mostly.
But because we make recording, we will publish it on YouTube. So if you would like to show to some of your students or other colleagues or others, you are more than welcome. Then you will have Jonas' wisdom shared and presentation as well in one place, and also discussions that are happening right now. So you will have all in one place at YouTube channel of URI Europe. So check it there.
So, and where will I be able to read this name or time, or in YouTube, or where?
The presentation itself will be at the YouTube channel of URI Europe, and also other information can be found at URI Europe website. We are providing information about upcoming webinars as well as those who already happened. So I will write it. I already write it down, but you can check our website and find all information over there.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So here is the website again, and there you can also find the link for our YouTube channel, and you will be able to follow everything there. Thank you for your interest. Okay, I think that we can stop recording now, probably.
May I